They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from the ones you love. At 68, I thought I'd faced life's worst storms. Losing my husband, working 40 years without a break, raising my only daughter, Clara, through every disaster. But nothing prepared me for the day she looked me straight in the eyes and told me to leave my own home. No job, no savings, no family to turn to. I walked away with nothing but a worn suitcase and a heart shattered into pieces. I thought my story had ended there, quietly fading into loneliness. But life wasn't done with me, because just when I was certain the world had turned its back, fate placed a single crumpled lottery ticket in my hands. And that ticket changed everything. Love, loyalty, and family would never look the same again. At 68, I thought my life would slow down, maybe even settle into a peaceful routine. For 40 years, I'd worked as a construction site accountant, handling endless invoices, balancing budgets, watching projects rise from dusty blueprints into concrete and steel. My colleagues had become my second family, my desk a second home. That morning felt no different from countless others. I brewed my usual cup of coffee, pulled on my worn navy cardigan, and headed to the office with my ledger tucked under my arm. But the moment I walked in, I noticed the shift. The air was too still, and the young faces around me wore that polite, pitying look I'd come to dread. "Margaret, could you step into my office for a moment?" My manager, Brent, barely 30, stood at his door. His smile was thin, rehearsed. Inside, his words came fast, carefully packaged in corporate courtesy. "The company is moving to automated systems. Your position has been cut. We appreciate your years of service." I sat there numb, watching his lips move. 40 years of loyalty dissolved into a few neat sentences. No warning, no second chance. My ID badge felt heavier as I slid it across his desk. The walk home was colder than the autumn wind. My thoughts were a jumble of numbers, just not the kind I'd been trained to calculate. Clara still owed me money from her divorce settlement. Ethan's school fees were due next month. Lily's ballet lessons weren't cheap. And the mortgage, though nearly paid, still claimed its share of my monthly budget. At 68, finding another job wasn't just unlikely, it was nearly impossible. My fingers tightened around my purse strap as I turned onto our street. Home. At least here, I told myself, I'd find comfort. The warm chaos of my daughter's voice, the sound of the grandchildren bickering over the television. But when I stepped inside, I was met not with concern or quiet understanding, but the lilting excitement of Clara's laughter. She was perched at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through a glossy website. "Oh, Mom, you have to see this," she said, waving me over. "I found the perfect advanced spa therapy course in Miami. It's expensive, but imagine the opportunities. I'll be able to make so much more once I'm certified." Her eyes shone with plans that all hinged on finances she didn't have. I froze in the doorway, my heart sinking. Here she was talking about investing in her future, completely unaware that the financial foundation beneath her feet had just crumbled. She kept talking, her words tumbling over each other. "I just need to figure out how to cover the deposit. Maybe use some of the tax refund or dip into the savings. It's an investment, Mom, for all of us." An investment. For all of us. Her voice, so full of expectation, contrasted sharply with the weight pressing down on my chest. I hadn't even told her yet, but I could already see the ripples my news would cause. Sharp, unforgiving ripples. As she continued to scroll through images of sleek spa studios and glowing testimonials, I stepped into the kitchen, my shoes suddenly feeling too loud against the tile. Ethan and Lily sat at the counter, hunched over their homework, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their mother's cheerful tone. I took a seat across from Clara, folding my hands to keep them from trembling. She looked up, still smiling, completely oblivious. "Mom, I can feel it," she said, her voice brimming with confidence. "This is the break I've been waiting for." I wished I could share her optimism, but instead I felt the sharp sting of reality. one I'd have to voice soon, even knowing how hard it would hit her. As she spoke, my mind wandered briefly to the last few years. When her marriage fell apart, she came to me in tears. I'd opened my home, my savings, my heart, paying her legal fees, helping her settle into stability again. Each time she promised she'd get back on her feet, I believed her. Each time, the repayment was delayed. And now, sitting across from her, hearing her talk about new plans, I realized she still saw me as the safety net. A net that, as of this morning, had been cut clean through. I inhaled deeply, the words heavy on my tongue. She didn't notice. She was too busy imagining a future that would never account for what I'd just lost. I glanced at Ethan, his brow furrowed in concentration over a math worksheet, at Lily, carefully coloring the edges of a paper ballerina. They trusted me. They trusted this home. The irony burned. They had no idea their stability was balancing on a job that no longer existed. Clara laughed again, tapping her screen. Look at this module. Deep tissue therapy. Miami beaches. Mom, maybe you can even come with me for a little vacation while I study. Her words, innocent on the surface, sliced deep. A vacation. While my career had just ended in a cold office with a polite dismissal, I nodded faintly, my throat too tight to answer. The clash between her bright plans and my dark news churned inside me. I couldn't tell her here, not like this, not in front of Ethan and Lily, but I knew, before the day was done, the truth would have to come out. And when it did, everything would change. Clara finally noticed I'd gone quiet. Her smile faltered, replaced by that cautious tilt of her head she used when she sensed something wasn't quite right. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, closing her laptop halfway. I took a steadying breath. "Clara, I lost my job today." Her face went blank for a moment, like she hadn't processed the words. Then her eyes widened, her voice sharp. What do you mean, lost your job?" "The company's switching to automated systems," I said quietly. "They've eliminated my position. 40 years and..." My voice trailed off. Clara stared at me as if I'd just confessed to some terrible mistake. "I can't believe this. You didn't see this coming. You didn't prepare? Mom, you know how much we depend on your income." Her words cut, but there was no malice, just fear disguised as anger. I'd heard this tone before, usually when bills piled up or unexpected expenses cropped up. "I've been careful, Clara," I said softly, "but there's only so much I can do. I still have my pension." "Your pension?" she interrupted, incredulous. "That barely covers the utilities, let alone food, school, gas, Lily's lessons." Her voice rose, rattling through a mental list of expenses. Each one dropped like a heavy stone on the table between us. Ethan had stopped writing. Lily's crayon hovered mid-air. Both sat silent, their eyes darting between us. "Clara," I began, but she held up a hand, pacing the kitchen like the floor might collapse beneath her. "You couldn't just keep working? Find something else?" she pressed, frustration edging into her voice. "I'm 68, I reminded her gently. "Finding another job?" "Don't say that," she cut in sharply. "You can't just quit on us, Mom. We have responsibilities." Her words stung. Quit on us? As if I had chosen this. As if I hadn't spent decades carrying responsibilities that weren't mine alone. "I'm not quitting," I said firmly. "I'm doing what I can with what I have." Clara stopped pacing, her arms crossed. "Well, I hope you've thought about the next few months. Ethan's school trip is coming up. Lily's recital fees are due. I'm counting on..." I raised a hand, my patience thinning. "Clara, I don't know how much more I can contribute right now." Her eyes narrowed, sharp with something I couldn't name, and then her tone shifted, just slightly, but enough to make the hairs on my neck stand on end. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking, maybe we should look at some other arrangements, just in case you can't keep up." I frowned. What kind of arrangements? She shrugged, casual on the surface, but her gaze was steady. Well, you have the guest room upstairs. Maybe we could rent it out, or you could take some time somewhere else. Downsize? It might help everyone. Her words landed heavy. Somewhere else. I heard the unspoken sentence as clear as if she'd shouted it. If you can't contribute, maybe you shouldn't stay. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I didn't recognize my daughter. Ethan's pencil rolled off the counter. Lily shifted in her chair. Neither spoke, but their eyes told me they understood far more than Clara realized. The air in the room had changed. The kitchen, usually filled with laughter or the noise of everyday chaos, felt tight, brittle. I straightened my back. Clara, this is my home too, I said evenly. I know, she replied quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm just saying, we all need to be realistic. If you're not working... Her words trailed off, the rest implied but unsaid. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind her of the years I'd sacrificed, her college tuition, her wedding, the down payment on this very house. But I stayed quiet, not because the memories weren't there, but because I saw the way Ethan was gripping his pencil, the way Lily's shoulders curled in. The fight wasn't worth their fear, not tonight. Instead, I looked at my daughter, my voice calm but firm. We'll figure it out, but we'll figure it out together. Her lips pressed into a thin line. We'll see, she said softly, almost to herself. And just like that, she opened her laptop again, the screen lighting up her face, shutting me out. The sound of keys tapping filled the silence that had settled over us. The days following my confession were uneasy, like the silence before a storm. Clara went about her routines, but I could feel the weight in the air, every conversation edged with something unsaid. It came to a head one Thursday evening. Ethan was upstairs, Lily tucked in, early after ballet. Clara stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms folded like she was bracing herself for a difficult conversation. Mom, she began, voice carefully even, I've been thinking about the situation, about how we're going to manage things going forward. I set down the dish towel, feeling the unease ripple through me. I told you, I'm doing what I can with my pension. I know, she interrupted, a little too quickly. But it's not enough. We both know it's not enough. We can't keep living like this, scraping by. The bills are stacking up, and she hesitated, glancing toward the ceiling as if checking that the kids weren't listening. And what? I prompted. Her gaze dropped back to me, firm now. I think it might be best if you considered other living arrangements. Just for a while. Maybe rent a small place, something more affordable for you. It would give us room to get back on our feet here. The words hit like a physical blow. Other living arrangements? I repeated slowly. Clara, this is my home. I bought it. I've lived here for decades. I know, she said again, but there was no softness in her tone. And I'm grateful, Mom, I am. But the kids need stability. They need this house. And with you not working, I just don't see how we can make it work long term. I felt the floor tilt under me. So you're asking me to move out of my own house? For stability? It's not just that, she pressed on. If the mortgage and utilities weren't split, it would free up money for the kids' needs. And there's another thing. Hein, her voice faltered, and I caught the flicker of something. Nervousness? Guilt? What other thing? I asked, suspicion creeping in. She exhaled slowly, as if steeling herself. I haven't told you everything, Mom. The truth is, I'm behind on some payments, more than a few. The spa training program? I had to put down a non-refundable deposit. Then Ethan's school trip came up and Lily's recital fees, and you're in debt, I said flatly. Her cheeks flushed. It's not just that. The credit cards are maxed out, and the car, well, I had to refinance it last year after the repairs, and now the bank's starting to call. I I stared at her, my pulse pounding. All those nights she'd insisted she was managing fine. All those conversations cut short when I offered to help review her budget. It hadn't been pride, it had been concealment. "So this is about the money," I said quietly. "It's about survival," she shot back. "I need to protect this house for the kids. But the bank is going to want collateral if I refinance again. And..." Her voice softened, but it was the kind of softness that felt calculated. "If the house was in my name, it would make things simpler. We could negotiate better terms. It would keep everything secure for Ethan and Lily." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You want me to transfer the house to you?" "It's just a formality," she said quickly. "You'd still live here, at least that was my original thought. But now, with the way things are..." She trailed off, letting the implication hang. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. "Clara, this house is my only security. It's what I have for my old age. You're asking me to sign that away." "I'm asking you to think of your grandchildren," she replied, her eyes hardening. "They need a safe home, and if you can't help financially the way you used to, maybe this is the way you can still help." Her words were a dagger wrapped in silk. On the surface, she spoke of the children, of safety, of family, but underneath was desperation, and maybe something darker. I thought of all the times I'd stepped in before, paying her divorce lawyer, covering months of expenses, fixing her car. Each time, I'd told myself I was helping her get back on her feet, but standing there now, I realized she'd never truly stood on her own. I looked into her eyes, searching for the daughter I'd raised, the girl who used to cling to my hand at the playground, who'd wept on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. But all I saw was a woman cornered by her own decisions, looking for the easiest way out, and that way out was me. "I can't do it, Clara," I said finally. My voice was steady, but my chest ached. "I won't sign the house over, and I won't leave my home." Her expression tightened, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "Then I don't know how we're going to make this work," she said coldly. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ethan, no doubt listening. I wanted to shout, to demand how she could even suggest such a thing, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I turned away, busying myself with the dishes, even though they were already clean. Anything to keep my hands from shaking. Behind me, Clara sighed, the sound sharp with irritation. "I'll figure something out," she muttered, her voice trailing off as she left the room. I stood alone, staring out the window at the darkened street. The home I'd built, the family I'd supported, all of it felt suddenly fragile, as if a single wrong move could make it collapse. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I belonged here anymore. Clara's frustration simmered for 2 days after our conversation about the house. She avoided direct arguments, but her voice stayed clipped, her footsteps heavy through the hall. I tried to keep the peace for Ethan and Lily's sake, hoping the tension might cool on its own. It didn't. Saturday morning, she cornered me in the living room. "I've talked to the bank again," she began, her tone brisk, rehearsed. "Without your signature, they can't process the refinancing. There's no other way to secure the house." I looked at her, weary. "Clara, I've already told you, I will not sign the house over. I'm not putting my security at risk." Her jaw tightened. "Your security? What about our security? The kids' security? Do you even hear yourself? You've got a pension. You'll be fine. We're the ones in danger of losing everything." My patience thinned. "Clara, this house is my home. I bought it. I worked for decades to pay for it. I will not hand it over to cover debts I didn't create." Her voice rose, sharp and sudden. "Then maybe you shouldn't live here if you're not willing to help." I froze. The words, though not unexpected, still landed like a slap. Ethan, who'd been walking past with a stack of laundry, stopped mid-step. "Mom," he began, his voice tight with alarm. "This is between me and your grandmother," Clara snapped, turning on him. "Go to your room." "She's done everything for us," Ethan protested, his voice cracking with emotion. "Ethan!" Clara's tone cut like glass. "I said go to your room!" He hesitated, looking at me with worry in his eyes, but I nodded faintly. I didn't want this fight spilling over onto him. Shoulders slumped, he retreated upstairs. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly, her anger pulsing in the space between us. "I can't keep doing this," she said finally, her voice low but shaking. "I can't live under this roof with you refusing to be realistic. I think it's best if you leave. Today." It was as if the air was sucked out of the room. "You're asking me to leave my home," I said quietly. "I'm telling you I can't keep this tension going," she shot back. "I need stability for the kids. You can find a place that fits your pension. I'll figure out the rest here." For a moment, I simply stood there, staring at the woman I'd raised. Every sacrifice, every long night, every dollar spent to hold this family together flashed in my mind, and now it all seemed invisible to her. Without a word, I turned toward my room. My hands moved automatically, pulling my old suitcase from the closet. Clothes, a few photos, my worn leather wallet. I packed slowly, each item feeling heavier than its weight. When I stepped into the hallway, suitcase in hand, Lily came bounding out of her room. Her eyes widened as she saw me. "Grandma, where are you going?" she asked, her voice small. I forced a smile. "Just going away for a little while, sweetheart." Her lip trembled, and before I could say more, she threw her arms around my waist, holding tight. "Don't go. Mom says you don't love us anymore, but I know you do. Please don't go." Her words pierced deeper than Clara's anger ever could. My arms wrapped around her instinctively, holding her close. "Oh, Lily," I whispered, my throat tight. "I love you more than anything. This isn't about that. It's just something I have to do right now." She sniffled, burying her face in my sweater. I wished I could stay, wished I could shield her from all of this, but I could feel Clara's presence at the end of the hallway, watching, impatient. "I'll call you," I promised softly, brushing a tear from her cheek, "and we'll see each other again soon." Reluctantly, she loosened her grip. I kissed her forehead, then straightened, my suitcase feeling like an anchor in my hand. I walked toward the front door. Clara didn't speak. Neither did I. The sound of the latch clicking felt final, like a door shutting on more than just the house. The cool air outside hit my face, sharp with early autumn. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the home that had held my life for decades. Then I turned and walked down the steps. Finding a place to stay was easier than I'd expected, though the reality stung. The Sea Breeze Motel sat at the edge of town, its faded sign swinging in the wind. The clerk didn't ask many questions. I paid for a week in advance with what little cash I had. The room was small, barely enough space for the single bed and a rickety dresser. The carpet smelled faintly of damp, the wallpaper peeling at the corners. But it was mine for now. That night, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, the hum of the old radiator filling the silence. I thought about Ethan, forced to stay quiet, about Lily clinging to me at the door, about Clara standing cold and resolute in the hallway, and I realized for the first time in a long time, I was truly alone. The Sea Breeze Motel was the kind of place people stayed when they had nowhere else to go, and I fit right in. The hallways smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and the sea. The radiator in my room rattled like it was struggling to stay alive, but it was cheap enough that my pension could stretch, at least for a little while. I learned quickly to budget every penny. Breakfast was instant coffee and the motel's complimentary toast. Lunch, if I had one, was usually a small soup from the diner down the street. Dinner was whatever groceries I could buy on sale at the corner market. I kept my receipts, calculating expenses down to the last coin, the way I'd once done for million-dollar construction projects. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake listening to the distant hum of traffic, the occasional crash of waves. I thought of Ethan and Lily, wondering if Lily still cried at night, if Ethan still avoided meeting his mother's eyes. The silence in the motel room seemed louder than any argument Clara and I had ever had. On my 4th morning there, I came down to the lobby to collect my mail, mostly bills and pension statements. Faye, the motel's receptionist, greeted me with her usual warmth. She was in her late 50s with dyed red hair and a kindness that reminded me of a neighbor I'd once had. "Morning, Miss Lewis," she said, sliding my mail across the counter. "Morning, Faye," I replied, tucking the envelopes under my arm. She hesitated, then held up a small cardboard display from behind the desk. "You know, we've been trying to sell off these leftover lottery tickets before they expire. One of the guests bought a bunch and never came back. Technically, they're paid for, but they'll just go to waste if nobody takes them." I smiled faintly, shaking my head. I've never been much of a gambler. "It's not gambling if it's free," she teased, her eyes twinkling. She slid one across the counter toward me. "Here, maybe it'll change your luck." I took the ticket, more out of politeness than hope. "Thanks, Faye. I'm not expecting much." "That's the spirit," she said with a wink. The ticket was for the Golden Horizon jackpot, grand prize $5 million. The numbers were printed in neat rows, meaningless to me. I slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan without a second thought. The rest of the day passed in the quiet rhythm I'd settled into. I washed my clothes in the motel's coin-operated machines, walked along the pier for some fresh air, and returned to my room to read an old paperback I'd picked up at the thrift store. Days blurred together. I thought about the ticket once or twice, meaning to check the results, but each time something distracted me. A call from the pension office, a letter from the bank. It stayed in my pocket, forgotten. A few nights later, as I was hanging up my cardigan, the ticket fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, smoothing the creases with my thumb. The draw date printed on the front was from 3 days ago. I almost tossed it in the trash. After all, what were the chances? But something, curiosity, boredom, maybe stubbornness, made me pause. The old TV in the lounge still had a stack of newspapers beside it. I went downstairs and flipped through until I found the lottery results. My eyes scanned the numbers, more out of routine than expectation, and then I froze. The first number matched, then the second, and the third. My pulse quickened. The fourth number matched, the fifth. By the time I reached the sixth, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the paper. All 6 numbers, every single one. I stared at the ticket, then at the newspaper, then back at the ticket again. Surely I was reading it wrong. Surely there was some mistake. But the numbers didn't change. $5 million. The ticket that had been sitting forgotten in my cardigan pocket for days was worth $5 million. I sank into the nearest chair, my mind spinning. I'd spent my whole life counting pennies, worrying about bills, stretching every dollar until it nearly tore. And now, in the quiet lobby of a rundown motel, my world had shifted. $5 million. I could almost hear Clara's voice in my head, the sharp edge of her words. I knew if she found out, she'd be at my door before the check cleared. For the first time in a long time, I smiled to myself. Because this time, she wouldn't know. Not yet. For a long moment, I sat in the dusty motel lounge with the lottery ticket clutched in my hand, staring blankly at the old newspaper. I reread the numbers again and again, comparing them to the ticket in my lap. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. It couldn't be real. The logical side of me, the accountant, screamed that there must be a catch, a misprint, a scam. No one just wins $5 million with a forgotten piece of paper tucked inside a cardigan. But there it was. Every number lined up, clean, precise, impossible to argue with. I folded the ticket carefully, slipped it into an envelope from my purse, and took it back to my room. My hands trembled as I locked the door and closed the blinds. The next morning, I called the lottery office. I didn't give my name. I just asked, hypothetically, what someone should do if they might be holding a winning ticket. The voice on the line was chipper, professional. She explained the process. I'd need to verify the ticket in person at the regional office, provide ID, fill out tax forms. Standard procedure. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Even if it was true, even if I really had one, what did that mean? Money like that could change everything. I could buy my own home again, live in peace, give Ethan and Lily something for their future. I could finally stop worrying. But there was something else, too. A cold whisper at the back of my mind, Clara. What would she do if she found out? Would she pretend nothing had happened? Would she try to take control? Would she guilt me, manipulate the kids, twist everything into a story where she was the victim? The thought made my stomach twist. I'd seen the desperation in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was an ATM that had suddenly run dry. This money, it would turn that desperation into something far worse. So I made a decision. I would claim the winnings. But no one, not Clara, not Ethan, not Lily, would know. Not yet. I waited 2 more days just to be sure. Then, early one morning, I boarded a bus to the regional lottery office 3 towns over. The building was plain and gray, tucked between a dental clinic and a shuttered diner. Inside, everything felt too bright. Fluorescent lights humming, glossy posters of smiling winners on the walls. I walked up to the receptionist and handed her the envelope. My fingers were ice cold. She took the ticket with a practiced hand and disappeared into a back room. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. My heart thundered with every second. Finally, a man in a blazer appeared, beaming. "Ms. Lewis, congratulations! We verified your ticket. You are the official winner of the Golden Horizon jackpot." I blinked. "You're sure?" He laughed gently. "Quite sure. You'll need to fill out some paperwork. And of course, there's the option to take a lump sum or annual payments. We'll have a financial advisor walk you through everything." He handed me a packet of documents, legal terms, tax forms, privacy agreements. One paragraph stood out. Winner may request anonymity per state law. Name and photo will not be made public unless consent is given. I circled that clause with a red pen before signing. I chose the lump sum. After taxes and fees, I'd walk away with just over $3 million, still an amount that made my head spin. When the paperwork was done, they handed me a certified letter and told me the funds would be transferred within 5 business days. I took the bus back in silence. The envelope was tucked deep into my purse, zipped into an inner pocket. I kept one hand on it the whole ride. Back at the motel, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I should have felt ecstatic, free, vindicated, even smug. And Clara had cast me out like I was disposable, and now I was wealthier than she could imagine. But I didn't feel smug. I felt afraid. Because with money came choices. With choices came consequences. And with consequences came people who would circle like vultures the moment they caught a whiff of opportunity. I thought of Ethan's tired eyes as he defended me, of Lily's arms wrapped around my waist, crying for me not to go. I thought of Clara's fury, her entitlement, her willingness to twist my love into a weapon. This money, it was my chance to break the cycle, to build something entirely new, but only if I was careful. No one could know, at least not yet. So I told Faye, the receptionist, that I'd had some unexpected family news and needed to leave town soon. She offered me a hug and said she'd miss our morning chats. I started searching for real estate online, small coastal towns where I could buy a home in cash and disappear into a quiet life. The days passed slowly, but the money arrived just as promised. One moment, I was checking the balance on a dusty old bank account. The next, there were more zeros than I'd ever seen attached to my name. And yet, I didn't go shopping. I didn't book a flight. I didn't even tell a soul. Instead, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring out the window at the gray sky, clutching a paper check that could buy me the world. And I whispered to myself, start over. But do it quietly. Willow Bay wasn't a place you stumbled upon by accident. It was the kind of small coastal town you had to seek out, nestled between rugged cliffs and wide, quiet beaches, far from the hum of highways and the press of cities. That was exactly what I wanted. I arrived on a crisp morning, the air carrying the scent of salt and pine. The real estate agent met me outside a modest 2-story cottage perched on a rise overlooking the water. The house wasn't grand, white siding weathered by sea winds, blue shutters faded by sun. But the moment I stepped onto the porch and heard the steady rhythm of waves below, I knew this would be home. We walked through the rooms. The kitchen was small but bright, with windows that looked out toward the ocean. The living room had a wide stone fireplace, the kind that begged for winter evenings and a warm blanket. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms faced the sea. A third looked over the sloping backyard where wildflowers bent in the breeze. "I'll take it," I told the agent, surprising even myself with how quickly the words came. No hesitation, no second guessing. For once in my life, the decision was entirely my own. The purchase was straightforward. Cash, no loans, no lingering debt. A week later, I was holding the keys, standing alone in my new home. The first days were a whirlwind of unpacking and small repairs. I painted the kitchen cabinets a soft cream, scrubbed the floors, replaced the old curtains with simple linen ones. Every choice was quiet, personal, free of compromise or someone else's approval. On my 3rd afternoon, as I wrestled with a stubborn storm window, I heard a voice from across the hedge. "Need a hand with that?" I turned to see a woman standing in the yard next door. She was tall, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and eyes the color of summer skies. She wore gardening gloves and a wide straw hat, a trowel in one hand. "I wouldn't mind," I admitted, stepping back. She came over, surprisingly spry for her age. With a few practice motions, the window slid neatly into place. "There," she said with a satisfied nod. "These old houses can be temperamental." "Thank you," I said, offering my hand. "I'm Margaret. Just moved in." "Helen Carter," she replied warmly. "Welcome to Willow Bay. I live next door, in the blue house with the roses out front." Over the next few days, Helen became a regular presence. She brought over a loaf of homemade bread, then a basket of fresh tomatoes from her garden. She invited me for tea on her porch, where we watched the tide roll in and out, the air humming with gull calls. It wasn't long before we were talking like old friends. She told me she'd been widowed 5 years earlier. Her husband, David, had been a fisherman. She'd stayed in Willow Bay for the quiet, the sea, and the community she'd built over decades. One afternoon, as we sipped tea, she asked casually, "So what brings you here, Margaret? It's not often we get newcomers buying houses outright." I hesitated. "Let's just say I was ready for a fresh start." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, but she didn't press. Instead, she smiled knowingly. "Fresh starts are the best kind. You get to decide what you carry with you and what you leave behind." It was only later, as we walked through her garden, that I learned something unexpected. Helen had spent her career as a financial advisor before retiring to Willow Bay. "You must be good with money," she said lightly one day, kneeling to prune a rosebush. "Not everyone makes the leap to a place like this without a plan." I gave a small shrug. "I manage." She chuckled. "If you ever want to talk investments or long-term security, let me know. Old habits die hard, and I can't help running numbers in my head." Her offer was casual, but I tucked it away. Having someone like Helen, knowledgeable, trustworthy, felt like finding a rare coin in the sand. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the porch, watching the gulls wheel above the surf. Afternoons, I worked on the house or walked along the beach, the sound of waves softening the edges of my thoughts. Evenings often ended with Helen, tea on her porch or mine, a comfortable silence between 2 women who understood the weight of years. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt at peace. Life in Willow Bay unfolded gently, like the tide. The morning started with the cry of gulls and the steady hum of the ocean. It didn't take long for me to realize this town had its own quiet pulse, and if you lived here, you learned to move with it. Helen was the first to nudge me toward the community. "You can't just sit in that cottage like a hermit," she said one breezy morning, planting her hands on her hips. "There's a book club at the library on Thursdays. You'd like them. They're mostly widows, but don't let that scare you. They're sharper than they look." I laughed, but I went. The library smelled faintly of salt and old pages, its walls lined with tall shelves that reached nearly to the ceiling. The book club gathered in a sunny room at the back, where mismatched chairs circled a low table, piled with novels and coffee cups. Introductions were warm and curious. By the end of the first meeting, I'd already been invited to next week's discussion and the Saturday picnic at Crescent Beach. The picnic was another kind of welcome. Long tables set up on the sand, covered with checkered cloths and laden with homemade pies, fresh bread, and bowls of fruit. Children darted in and out of the surf while their parents chatted. Helen made the rounds with me, introducing me to everyone, from Gilbert, a retired sailor with more stories than wrinkles, to Elise, who ran the tiny art studio on Main Street. Elise insisted I join her weekend painting class. "I've never painted in my life," I protested. "That's the best time to start," she replied, pressing a flyer into my hand. And so my weeks began to fill. Book club on Thursdays, painting class on Saturdays, tea with Helen whenever the weather allowed. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better. But even with the peace of my new life, there was a quiet ache that never fully faded. Ethan, Lily. I thought of them often. Ethan's quiet, steady nature, the way he'd stood up to his mother for me, Lily's wide eyes, her small arms wrapped tight around my waist. I wondered how they were doing, if Clara still spoke of me, and if so, what she said. One afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through a small stack of mail. Most of it was local: store flyers, a newsletter from the library, a postcard advertising a seasonal market. Then my fingers brushed over an envelope that made me pause. There was no return address. The handwriting was uneven, almost hesitant, but familiar enough that my breath caught. I slid it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "Dear Grandma, I hope you're okay. Mom says we shouldn't bother you, but I don't think it's bothering if I just say hi. Lily misses you a lot. I do too. Things are okay here, I guess. School is busy. Mom is still mad, but I think she'll calm down someday. I just wanted you to know I didn't forget you. Please don't forget us. Love, Ethan." I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling in my hands. The ache in my chest deepened, but it was laced with something else. Hope. He had found me. Somehow, despite Clara's efforts, Ethan had gotten my address, and he'd risked her anger to reach out. The letter was simple, but it carried more weight than any gift. It was proof that my bond with them hadn't been severed completely. I read it again and again, committing every word to memory. That evening, I walked to Helen's porch. She was tending to her roses, humming softly. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw me, I held up the letter. "Better than a ghost," I said softly. "Ethan wrote to me." Helen's eyes warmed with understanding. She gestured for me to sit, pouring tea into 2 cups. I read the letter aloud, my voice catching slightly at the edges. "That boy," Helen said when I finished. "He's got courage. More than most adults I know." I nodded, folding the letter carefully. "I don't know how he found my address, but I need to be careful. I don't want Clara to think I'm interfering." Helen gave me a look. "You're his grandmother. Writing a letter isn't interference, it's love. If she can't see the difference, that's her problem." Her words eased something in me. Still, I knew Helen was right in more ways than one. I had to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted was to make things harder for Ethan and Lily. That night, I placed Ethan's letter in the small drawer of my bedside table, a reminder that even from a distance, family ties could survive. Life in Willow Bay continued. Book club debates, painting classes where my seascapes looked more like abstract blobs, long walks on the beach at sunset. But now, there was an undercurrent of something more. I wasn't just starting over. I was quietly holding on to the hope that one day I could bring Ethan and Lily into this peaceful world I was building. For now, though, I kept my life here, quiet, and my secrets safe. It had been nearly 3 months since I'd moved to Willow Bay. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Book club, walks along the beach, tea with Helen. Ethan's letter was tucked safely in my bedside drawer, read often enough that I could recite it by heart. One gray afternoon, I was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me hesitated. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Mom? Clara. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hands tightened on the receiver. Clara, I said finally, my voice careful. She hesitated, then her words tumbled out in a rush. I know I was wrong. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I've been thinking a lot about how we left things, and I closed my eyes, listening to the strain in her voice. It was familiar but different, softer. I want to make things right, she continued. I want us to be a family again. The kids miss you. I miss you. Her words might have touched me more, if not for the quiet alarm ringing in the back of my mind. Clara didn't call to apologize without a reason. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. I heard you've settled somewhere nice, she said carefully. By the ocean. That must be lovely. I froze. I hadn't told her where I was. Ethan's letter hadn't mentioned a location. My name wasn't on any public record in Willow Bay, not in a way she could easily find. She went on, voice casual. I'm glad you're comfortable. You deserve it after everything. My grip on the phone tightened. How did you hear that? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. Oh, you know how small towns are. Clara replied quickly. Mrs. Clark from the old neighborhood said she saw you leaving the lottery office months ago. And, well, she trailed off. And there it was, Mrs. Clark, my former neighbor, always peering from behind her curtains, always quick with gossip. But there was something off. Even if Mrs. Clark had seen me at the lottery office, she wouldn't know about Willow Bay. You've been asking around, I said slowly. There was a pause, just long enough to confirm my suspicion. I just wanted to know you were okay, Clara said finally. I could picture her perfectly, standing in her kitchen, twisting the phone cord, wearing that careful tone she used when she wanted something. I'm fine, I said evenly. Very fine. She hesitated. I heard about the lottery. Mom, $5 million. That changes everything. I cut in sharply. I mean, her voice softened again. You could help with the kids' school fees, maybe fix up the house. We could put everything behind us. Her apology, her sudden desire to rebuild the family, her knowledge of details I'd never shared, it all slid into place like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to see completed. You've had someone looking for me, I said quietly. That's ridiculous, she said too quickly. Is it? Silence. I exhaled, steadying my voice. Clara, if you wanted to know if I was alive, you could have called months ago. You didn't. Now you've heard about the money, and suddenly here you are. Do you see how that looks? Her voice cracked just enough to sound hurt. Mom, I'm trying. I made mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. I don't want money. I want my family back. The sincerity in her tone might have been convincing to someone else, but I'd been her mother too long not to hear the layers beneath it. Clara, I said gently, I think we both need some time to think about what family means to us. There was a long pause. I'll come visit, she said finally, her tone light but firm. That's not necessary. It's the only way to really talk, Mom. The line went quiet after she hung up, but the echo of her words lingered. For the first time since moving to Willow Bay, I locked my front door that night. It was a damp Tuesday morning when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. I wasn't expecting anyone. Helen usually called before dropping by, so I wiped my hands on a dish towel and peered out the front window. My stomach tightened. Clara's car. The driver's door opened, and there she was, stepping out in a tailored coat, her hair perfectly styled despite the misty air. A moment later, the back doors swung open and Ethan and Lily emerged. My heart leapt at the sight of them. Ethan taller than I remembered, shoulders squaring in that awkward teenage way, Lily with her hair in a braid clutching a stuffed rabbit. I opened the door before they reached the porch. "Grandma," Lily squealed, running into my arms. Ethan followed more quietly, but the relief on his face was clear. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. I held them both close, breathing in the scent of their shampoo, their jackets cool from the damp air. Clara hung back, smiling with a softness I didn't entirely trust. "Mom," she said, her voice smooth. "It's good to see you." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Inside, the cottage filled with the sound of coats being shrugged off, boots set by the door. I made tea while the children wandered through the rooms, marveling at the ocean view from the back windows. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her eyes sweeping the space with careful interest. "It's lovely here," she said. "Peaceful. I can see why you'd want to keep it all to yourself." Her words were light, but there was an edge beneath them. We talked lightly at first. School updates from Ethan, Lily's dance recital, small anecdotes that warmed my heart. But as soon as the children drifted to the living room to play, Clara's voice shifted. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something practical." "Here it comes," I thought. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "I know things were tense before, but we can work together now. The house in the city needs repairs. Roofing, plumbing, all expensive. If we had some help, we could make it comfortable again for the kids." "Help?" I repeated evenly. "Yes, just until things stabilize. You have the resources now and it would benefit everyone. I'm not asking for myself. I'm thinking of Ethan and Lily." I looked at her steadily. "Clara, you asked me to leave that house. You told me there wasn't room for me there, and now you're asking me to put money into it." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "That was before. I was under stress. I made mistakes. But this is about the children." Before I could respond, Ethan's voice cut in from the doorway. "No, it's not." Both of us turned. He stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, his face pale but determined. "Ethan," Clara said sharply, "this is a private conversation." "No, it's not," he said, his voice steady. "You told Grandma to leave. You tried to make her sign the house over to you. You said it was the only way to fix things, and now you're here because you found out she has money." Clara's face went still, the color rising in her cheeks. "That's enough," she said through her teeth. "It's true," Ethan pressed. "I was there. I heard you. You kicked her out." The room went silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Clara's composure cracked for just a moment, anger flashing before she smoothed her expression. She stood, adjusting her coat. "Clearly this isn't the time for a productive discussion," she said coolly. "Clara," I began, but she held up a hand. "We'll talk later," she said, her voice clipped. She called for Lily, who reluctantly left her coloring book on the table. At the door, Ethan hesitated. He looked at me, a silent apology in his eyes. I squeezed his shoulder gently. "It's all right," I whispered. "We'll talk soon." Clara ushered them to the car without another word. I stood on the porch, watching them drive away, the mist swallowing the car as it turned down the lane. Inside, the cottage felt quieter than it had in weeks, but beneath the quiet was something else, a certainty. Clara hadn't changed, but Ethan had grown stronger, and that, I thought, might make all the difference someday. The weeks after Clara's visit passed with a curious kind of stillness, like the air after a storm that hasn't fully cleared. She didn't show up again in Willow Bay, but her voice found its way into my life in fits and starts. Sometimes it came sharp and cold, voicemails threatening legal action, vague mentions of rights and obligations. Other times, her tone was almost pleading, late-night calls where her voice cracked as she spoke of overdue bills, broken appliances, the stress of keeping everything together. I never promised her money. I never raised my voice. I learned to keep my words short, my tone even. "I hope you find a solution, Clara," I'd say, "but I can't solve this for you." The space between us stretched and shifted, not healed, but no longer raw. Ethan's letters were a different kind of constant. He wrote every 2 or 3 weeks, his handwriting growing neater with each one. Sometimes the letters were short updates about school, a science project, a basketball game, the new dog their neighbor adopted. Other times they were longer, full of questions about Willow Bay, about my garden, about whether I still baked the apple pies he loved. Each letter carried a sketch or a note from Lily. Some were simple. Stick figures of us holding hands, her in a pink dress, me with gray hair drawn like a cloud. Others were surprisingly detailed, seashells colored in careful shades, the curve of a lighthouse she'd probably seen in a book. I kept them all in a wooden box on my dresser, the kind of box meant for jewelry or keepsakes. Every now and then, when the house felt too quiet, I'd open it and look through the letters and drawings, each one a thread tying me to them. It was late spring when one of Ethan's letters carried something different. "Dear Grandma, school's almost out for summer. Lily wants to come see you, but Mom says not yet. I think she's still figuring things out. I know she gets mad sometimes, but she's been seeing someone, a counselor. She started a few months ago after things got really bad with work. She doesn't talk about it much, but I think it's helping. She yells less. She's trying to listen more. I don't know if it will fix everything, but it's different. I just thought you should know. Love, Ethan." I read the letter twice, then a third time. Clara, counseling. The idea felt almost strange in my mind, like turning over a stone and finding something unexpected beneath it. I didn't know if Ethan's words meant real change or just a fleeting effort, but it was something. And after everything, even the smallest sign of change felt worth noticing. I walked over to Helen's porch that afternoon. She was tending her roses as usual, her sun hat tipped back. "You look thoughtful," she said, glancing up as I sat on the steps. "I heard from Ethan," I told her. Helen's face softened. "Good news?" I hesitated. "Possibly. He says Clara's seeing a counselor, that she's trying." Helen leaned on her trowel, studying me. "And how does that make you feel?" I let out a short laugh, like I'm answering one of the counselor's questions. Her smile was patient. "You've kept your distance for a reason. But maybe, just maybe, she's starting to see what you've been saying all along. Or maybe she's looking for another way to get what she wants," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Helen didn't flinch. "Both can be true," she said simply. I turned Ethan's letter over in my hands, my thumb brushing the crease where I'd folded it. "I don't know if I can trust her," I admitted. "You don't have to trust her yet," Helen said. "You just have to decide what you'll do if she keeps trying. Will you keep the door closed, or will you leave it unlocked, just in case?" Her words stayed with me long after I walked home. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun sink into the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of gold and rose. The ocean below caught the light, shimmering like it was holding a secret. I thought about the years I'd spent bending over backwards for Clara, about the night she told me to leave my own house, about Lily's small arms around my waist, begging me not to go. I thought about the peace I'd found here in Willow Bay, the independence I'd built. And I thought about that locked door in Helen's metaphor. For now, I decided the door would stay closed. But maybe I wouldn't turn the key all the way. It was early June when the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer. I'd grown wary of unknown numbers, but the area code was familiar. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. Mom? Clara's voice was different this time, softer. There was no sharpness, no carefully measured edge. I braced myself. Clara. I wanted to call, not to fight, she said quickly, as if she knew I might hang up. I wanted to ask if you'd consider coming to visit just for a day. The kids miss you. I thought maybe we could have lunch. No arguments, I promise. Her words caught me off guard. There was no demand, no urgency, just an invitation. I hesitated. Clara, the last time we saw each other? I know, she interrupted. And I'm not proud of it. I've been working on things with my counselor. I can't fix everything overnight, but I want to start somewhere. For the kids, for us. For a long moment, I said nothing. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, waiting. Finally, I said, all right, I'll come. But Clara? Yes? This visit doesn't change my boundaries. I'm not moving back. I'm not taking on old roles. If I come, it's because I choose to, not because I feel obligated. Her voice was quiet. I understand. The following Saturday, I took the early bus into the city. The ride felt longer than I remembered, the landscape shifting from rolling coastal hills to familiar suburban streets. My stomach tightened as the bus turned onto roads I hadn't traveled in months. Clara met me at the stop. She looked tired. Not in the frazzled, resentful way I'd seen before, but in a way that suggested she was carrying her own weight instead of expecting someone else to lift it. Mom, she said, and for the first time in a long time, she hugged me without hesitation. Ethan and Lily were waiting at the house. Lily ran straight into my arms, nearly knocking me off balance. Ethan's smile was smaller but steady, his relief clear in his eyes. Lunch was simple. Pasta, salad, and a lemon tart Lily proudly declared she had helped make. Conversation stayed light. School, friends, summer plans. Clara listened more than she spoke, her sharp interjections replaced by quiet nods. After lunch, Lily dragged me to her room to show me a new drawing, a picture of the three of us standing on a beach. That's your house, she explained, pointing to a small blue cottage in the background. Ethan lingered by the door, watching his sister chatter. When Clara called them downstairs, he stayed behind for a moment. She's different, he said quietly. Not perfect, but different. I studied his face. There was no trace of forced optimism, just an observation from a boy who had learned to measure truth carefully. Downstairs, Clara was clearing the table. She looked up as I entered the kitchen. Thank you for coming, Mom. I know I haven't given you much reason to. I leaned against the counter, studying her. Clara, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I do know I can't go back to how things were. She nodded. I'm not asking you to. I don't want the kids to lose you completely. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us no longer sharp but tentative. When it was time to leave, Clara walked me to the bus stop. We'll take it one step at a time, she said quietly. One step at a time, I agreed. The ride back to Willow Bay felt different than the one that had brought me here. My chest felt lighter, not with resolution, but with acceptance. Clara might change. She might not. The future with her was uncertain. But as the bus wound its way along the coast and the sea came back into view, I realized something important. My happiness no longer depended on what she did or didn't do. When I stepped off the bus, the air was thick with the scent of salt and blooming roses. My cottage waited, warm and familiar. That evening, I stood on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching the waves. The horizon glowed gold as the sun dipped toward the water. I didn't know what would happen with Clara, but I knew that here, in this place, I had my freedom, my peace, my right to choose who I let into my life and on what terms, and that was enough.